Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Oleski with JMOR, and I'd like to welcome you to today's show, The Upside. As many of you know, to maximize your experience, we recommend that you put your Zoom screen on speaker view. I'm very excited today to introduce Beth Goldsmith, Chair-elect of the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore, and Dr. Scott Rifkin, our JMOR publisher, will be joining us shortly. He actually had a COVID-19 related business call he had to take. So I want to just tell you a little bit more about our show. We've been doing this for the past several weeks. It's a joint production brought to you by the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore and JMOR Magazine, really with the goal of informing the greater Baltimore Jewish community of all that's going on during these times of uncertainty. As you know, we come to you twice a week. Today, Tuesdays at noon, and Thursdays at 7 o'clock. We live stream here on Zoom and on the Facebook channels of the Associated and of JMOR. And we are really excited to have Rabbi Busch join us today. Beth, why don't you go ahead and introduce Rabbi Busch and welcome us.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. So today we're going to be talking about religion in the time of social distancing. For the past 2 months, religious institutions have been operating virtually. Last week, when Governor Larry Hogan announced Maryland was ready to move into stage 1 of the recovery plan, he added that religious institutions could resume holding services with certain safety restrictions. At the same time, several jurisdictions, including Baltimore City and Baltimore County, opted to take it slower, holding off allowing indoor worship services and ceremonies. So we're very fortunate today to have Rabbi Andrew Busch to talk about what we can expect moving forward, as well as how synagogues have been adapting to meet their congregation's needs during this pandemic. Rabbi Busch has been the rabbi at Baltimore Hebrew Congregation since 2008 and was one of 2 rabbis serving on the governor's Interfaith Task Force looking at reopening. So we are very happy to welcome to our show, Rabbi Busch.
Thank you, Beth.
And I'll jump right in.
Happy to be here.
I was going to say, jump right in and turn it over to you. So let's start with some background. How has the pandemic changed the way synagogues are reaching out to their members?
Without a doubt, this pandemic has 100% changed synagogue life and 100% not changed synagogue life. What I mean by the latter is the values we hold dear, the role of synagogues, whatever flavor they may be, is I think remains the same: to gather community, to draw people closer to holiness, to pursue social justice, to reach out to the Jewish community and beyond. All of those things are real, lasting, and we're having to figure it out all in new ways. So for the more liberal congregations, including Baltimore Hebrew Congregation, we are Zooming our services. In our case, our Bima is on Zoom, if you will, and where attendees at the service are sitting is actually in stream or on Facebook Live. We are teaching, actually in some ways a more accelerated rate of teaching, knowing that our congregants are somewhat stuck in place, and so we have daily adult education going on. We have had concerts going on. We're doing all those things. We're also pursuing social justice efforts as a congregation, and we're also reaching out to our congregants as we normally would, and yet again in a more intensified way as we reach
out. Okay, and so what should we expect as things are starting to reopen?
I think you should expect overall the majority of synagogues, I think this is true in many other religious communities as well, to take it very slow. The governor's working group that I was part of actually had very small steps of what it meant to potentially come back together for worship or education moving forward. The governor's actual announcement last week was broader than that in its numbers. And I think overall the Jewish community is following advice actually that came out of the Orthodox Union, which is just because something becomes legally possible doesn't mean that it has to actually be what we do. And specifically the Orthodox Union's advice was to lag legal authority by at least a week or two, if not longer. So I think you should see baby steps. I think you should see a lot of things still going on virtually in terms of being able to reach out to people. And none of the rabbis I'm talking with are in any rush to try to hold services that would have numerous challenges. Happy to enumerate what those challenges would be in person. In-person worship has numerous challenges. We're blessed with multiple worship spaces at Baltimore Hebrew Congregation. Let's just use our biggest space, the sanctuary. Despite being told that we could have 50% occupancy right now, we all think that's thoroughly unrealistic in terms of what it might mean for religious institutions. Not speaking about any other institutions or organizations or businesses. For religious organizations to try to bring 800 people together at this moment is unrealistic. To try to have even a quarter of that number together with social distancing. And then what would it mean to start coming together for services where we have masks on? What does it mean to come to services with the real concern shared within religious organizations and the arts, frankly, about singing in public? So much of Jewish worship involves singing in one way or another. And everything we read and hear tells us that singing, even with a mask on, spreads the aerosol nature of this more than just speaking. And so what does that mean? Everything from Torah chanting to congregational singing to a chazan or a cantor trying to sing. We're all trying to get our hands around how such things might happen. But all of that points towards taking very, very slow steps.
Jonathan, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, so Rabbi Busch, I mean, that's just fascinating. You know, who would have thought that the singing could be an issue? So here's a question. You know, the pandemic has clearly changed all of our lives, and especially when it comes to religious observances. But talk a little bit about how you as a rabbi have been able to comfort the bereaved. I mean, you know, this whole process of life and death cycles continue, and how are you managing that during COVID-19?
It's been very tricky. We as a community know we're lucky to have Levinson's as a partner, but when you're at a cemetery and there are only several people there, and you know there are other people who would have been there, and everyone is in masks. And I would add to that all but one of the funerals I've officiated at during this pandemic have happened to be horrendous weather. Now that's just insult to injury, but I mean that insult to injury, that the family is gathered. They can't have everyone there they want there. And then on top of that, they're physically uncomfortable. There was a funeral I did that was the wettest funeral I've ever done, possibly. And I don't mean that to be amusing, but I mean that in normal settings, we would have been in Levinson's, had a service, and then the burial would have been uncomfortable. So even in nicer weather, that's all very difficult on the family at that moment. And in many of these families, someone hasn't been able to travel in. What's interesting is both for my discussion with the family before the funeral and for Shiva after the funeral, Zoom has actually been a very powerful tool. And every family I've said this to, unless they've already attended a Zoom Shiva, rolls their eyes, right? Even if they've been using Zoom for work, for business, or some other product. And yet what it really means to be able to gather people in that room, to be able to sadly mute them, because Zoom can't handle everyone singing at the same time, but I see mouths moving and people participating. And then after leading what is for us has been an abbreviated service, allowing people to share memories of the deceased, allowing first whatever eulogies were first delivered at the cemetery. I wouldn't normally repeat them in Shiva, but we've been repeating them in Shiva, and then allowing people to share. And we leave, in our case, we leave that Zoom meeting open. I mean, long after I've left the room, they're still there. Allowing people to share memories and experiences. And It's not the same as being at a shiva and having 20 different conversations going on in every corner of a living room. So it's not as good, but in this time of isolation, it has helped break through the wall of letting people feel the warmth of their community. And every family I've spoken to after Shiva has told me exactly that it exceeded their expectations in terms of feeling the support of their formal and informal communities.
Very interesting. Thank you.
And such a feel-good answer, I have to say, because it is something that we talk about a lot, how terrible it is to lose someone any time, but particularly when you can't have everyone you want there. And for those of us who may want to be there to offer a hug, it's hard on all of us, but I love hearing that Zoom is working and is helpful in some ways. So I'm going to ask probably the biggest question in the whole scheme of things, and that is, what about the high holidays? They're coming soon, so there's about 100 little questions contained in one.
Yep.
Start us off on what are the thoughts, and I'm sure you speak regularly to the other rabbis.
I think in every line of business or volunteer life, there are people who are talking to local and national, both peers and experts, right? In these discussions, we as a congregation are consulting members of the congregation and non-members who are more expert. Right? I didn't know that thing about singing I shared, right? It took doctors to share that with us. Here is what I can assure you. The high holy days will not look like they've ever looked for us as a community before. I can also assure you, for every single synagogue, each in its own way, deep efforts will be made to make the high holidays robust and meaningful on a spiritual level and on a communal level. And we'll have to use different tools to do that, right? Clearly, we will not have full sanctuaries. I don't know what that means about how many people will be in our sanctuaries, but we will not have full sanctuaries. Or for many of our congregations, we won't have 2 or 3 or 4 services going on simultaneously in terms of that. And again, I think just a natural dividing line has to do with which congregations are Jewishly comfortable with using technology on a holy day and which are not. I will speak simply to our reality, which is that we do use technology on holy days, and so we imagine much of what we do will be, if you will, virtual in some way, but it will be high quality, it will be robust, it will deliver challenging messages, not just comforting messages, because in any given year we don't need just that comfort that we spoke about at Shiva, but on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we need to be prodded individually and what that means in terms of the world's needs around us. And in terms of anything more specific than that, can't tell you. What I can tell you is this, Beth, actually. First, a major congregation in Chicago, though it has happened in other places now, have actually come out with an announcement that their high holy days will be 100% online and distanced. And when I say online, that doesn't mean they might not be delivering something to congregants' houses also or something, but I would say most congregations have not felt a rush to give that answer. We have certainly watched the Christian community celebrate Easter, not only remotely, but at a moment where congregants were less attuned to the technical nature of things that might bring them together, right? And we've been working to up that level, including having technology mentors for our members who may not be as adept with streaming or Zoom. We have volunteers who are happy to help them talk through it. In terms of that, the Muslim community has celebrated Ramadan, right? I attended an iftar celebration last Saturday night. They weren't able to share food. They were doing everything they could to create meaning. And I think we will be able to figure this out one way or another. Synagogues are talking to each other. It won't look exactly the same in each synagogue, but we are learning from each other, sharing information, and preparing to bring our community together meaningfully as we hit Tishrei come September.
So Rabbi Busch, great answer there. So let's talk a little bit about spirituality. I mean, these are scary times, and many of us here are used to going to shul on a regular basis. It's our community, it's our comfort space, and several of us go there to talk to God. So now that we can't do that in the shul, in the temple, in the synagogue, how can we continue our journey and our quest for spirituality from home?
I think it's a moving question. I think I appreciate the way you phrased it. While we've got all the jokes about people going to shul to talk to the person next to them, the suggestion that some of us actually are going to shul to reach for God is a powerful one. I actually think our tradition, from the Torah through the Midrash on up, provides us with a portable heritage. In many ways more than some religions, not all religions. And I think the rabbis are, I would hope, important resources, guides, teachers in terms of what we experience during services. But we are not priests. And so you do not need our presence to be able to reach out for God, to be able to look at holy texts and consider things on a high holy day reality, to be able to engage in tshuva and think about who you are, who you've been, and the year ahead of you. And so I think it is possible to do things alone in that way. And yet we also have this powerful message of a minyan, of that we are not intended to be solitary and do these things only on our own. And that's going to be challenging. And so I think talking to God, attempting to hear God's message from our tradition, being inspired and drawn together, I do think all those things will be possible, not in the ideal way of last year or some future year, but certainly in a memorable way. I think people ended up finding Passover quite meaningful this year. Again, speaking from a piece of the community that was actively using Zoom or FaceTime or whatever that may be. That was a piece of what was memorable, but I also think the fact that people had to be somewhat creative in their own right, not just how they connected across the internet, but what did they do within their own family space? What did they do, whether it in terms of reaching out to those closest to them? I would hope, what did they do reaching out to those that they may not know as well, but are in their lives and more isolated? All those pieces, I think, made for a very meaningful Passover. I think we will see some of those ingredients, not the matzah, but some of those ingredients find their way into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in terms of things we learned and how we can find meaning in this experience.
I'm struck by you talking about Passover. Most homes have at least one Haggadah. Most homes where there has ever been a Seder. So people have access. It makes me wonder about, is there a way for us to distribute, I don't know if we charge or whatever, to make sure every home has a Siddur, that everybody has access so they can actually join in from home or at least follow along, because people may not have the very book that they need.
Right. I mean, I think this is going to play out differently in different congregations in terms of what they're capable of. So I would actually say that, I can only really comfortably speak for Baltimore Hebrew congregation in this case. We have in our Shabbat services since, I guess it must have been the third week of March, been following our traditional service, and yet assuming that the majority of people joining in with us do not have a Siddur in their hands. And in that case, the Siddur can actually be downloaded from our webpage. So we do have congregants who have the Siddur. We were originally not giving page numbers because we assumed plenty had not either done that or figured it out. we now know that many are, but many aren't. We've also experienced some seekers who've just wandered upon us, and we're not going to assume they have in front of us. We very well may, let me give that caveat because the discussion just began, we very well may have our Machzor, our High Holiday Prayer Book, downloadable from our page. As with a number of books, including the Siddur, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the producer of prayer books for Reform synagogues, actually, with an honor code, I guess, made available for the moment, the Siddur, to be able to be downloaded in that way for synagogues that already own the Siddur, which we do, as do the other Reform synagogues in the community. They also have just made available the Machzor in a digital form. I know for use on our digital Bima. I wasn't able to attend a call yesterday. I don't know if that means we're also going to make it available for download by our congregants. I've got till September to figure that one out in terms of that. But I think being able to have the prayer book in one's hands is important. And yet I think there are ways of doing this that are less prayer book directed, even as we experience this. Our approach to online worship is that it's got to be liturgically more streamlined than your average service. And so what needs to end up in hands in terms of vidui may not be the traditional prayers as much as some prompts. I do not imagine that Yom Kippur, if it is virtual or largely virtual, or even in person, but lots of people are following virtually, because we will without a doubt have members who can't come to the building health-wise, vulnerability-wise. This is not going to look like our regular Yom Kippur, where our sets of services begin around 9 and go all the way to sundown. It's not going to be, that would not be a meaningful experience of nonstop talking heads on a screen. So we are thinking creatively of what that may look like. And it also will be less prayer book driven. But let's be honest, Jews were praying before the printing press was created. We can figure a way to do this.
Funny. So Rabbi, kind of in the holiday theme, you know, we started COVID-19, and the first Jewish holiday we all had to deal with was Pesach, was Passover. Next week is Shavuot, so that'll be our second religious observance holiday under COVID-19. And any thoughts on how we could enhance our home Shavuot experiences, since we can't be in shul to see everybody?
There are some versions of this. I would say, look, Baltimore Hebrew Congregation actually has a sunrise service on Shavuot morning, and because we're not trying to squeeze this in before people re-enter the rest of our lives, that service has actually been moved to 10 o'clock this year. But and actually, thanks to Rabbi Daniel Berg at Beth Am, we have, I don't know, it may be a dozen organizations at this point, including some agencies of the Associated and a number of Reform and conservative synagogues, most of them, I think, who have joined together for Tikkun Leil Shavuot, that will have scholars, rabbis, cantors, and teachers from across the community, again, those able to use technology on a holy day, teaching through the night, right? And I think anyone can enter into that. So that's one possibility. And you know, on Shavuot, a good reading of the Book of Ruth at home could, it's actually one of those books that's readable in one evening within the Bible. So I think it's an excellent book to read, and of course some ice cream to celebrate the dairy side of things, even if you're not venturing out for your favorite cheesecake, possibly.
Thank you.
So it sounds like so much is going on. Have we actually seen, maybe it's just me, sort of a greater connection from the community to religion, to worship, to traditions since all of this has started?
You know, lots being explored and written about this, and this will be the future of PhD dissertations in multiple fields to come. We are certainly getting far larger attendance online than we do in person. The interesting thing is, the more people in the room in person, the less intimate that becomes, right? Simply the size of the room. When we're in our bigger worships, when we're in our sanctuary, you're further from the prayer leaders than you are when you're in the chapel. The intimacy that's enabled when you're on Zoom and worship, this kind of close-up is a piece of that. We are seeing, and every rabbi I talk to is saying similar things, we are seeing very high attendance in services, increased in Shabbat Torah study. I think that's about spiritual questions and needs at the moment. I think it's about a desire for connection. I think it's about, to be honest, boredom and lack of some alternatives. But let's be honest, the same screen that could bring you to a service can bring you to lots of different alternatives. It doesn't have you stuck in worship also. And I think that's a piece that, again, I think most synagogues are thinking about as we plan for Shavuot, for example, or for the High Holy Days. People want that connection with their local community. And I appreciate the emails I've gotten from someone from across the country who happens to have come to our services, or my mother and father have been at services most weeks. When they're not at their own synagogue in New Jersey, they've shown up on Zoom. But I don't think, our production values as a synagogue are never going to take on the biggest synagogues in New York or LA, or what some national organization or for-profit organization can do. But I actually think what people are looking for is connection to their own communities. And they're not looking for production values. We've got plenty of Netflix to take care of that. And I actually think that's why within our synagogues, we are feeling that nature of connection. I also think some of this is offline. So for example, Baltimore Hebrew Congregation, and I'm sure other synagogues are doing similar things, we are in a monthly set of waves trying to attempt to call every household within the congregation. We've heard back from some families that they didn't think they heard from us because we spoke to the wife and not the husband, or the husband and not the wife. The attempt isn't every individual, the attempt is every household. We have close to 100 volunteers, maybe more at this point, who are assisting clergy and staff in those calls, both trying to figure out who is in direct need because of this virus, but also simply trying to connect the community. And I think the virtual attendance at services and those phone calls are linked. They're two parts of the same puzzle of reaching out to people and having them feel connected. And I think that's part of what draws people in as they connect.
So Rabbi, one final question as we kind of begin to wrap up here. So I've had the pleasure of growing up as the son of a conservative rabbi, and certainly understand the 24/7 nature of your job. It never ends. And I'm curious, for you, what has been the most challenging aspect as a spiritual leader, as a teacher, as a modern day CEO of your congregation during COVID-19?
I would say two things, actually. The small thing, but it's not a small thing, is when we've gotten calls from members who are sick in the hospital, hospice. The natural inclination is to make sure we're there. In some cases, that means within a day or two. But in some cases, these are calls that would have had Rabbi Sachs Cohen or me or one of the cantors there as immediately. And while I can make an immediate phone call, I can't be there right now. And that is a real challenge on the one-to-one piece. The other piece becomes the same as anyone else, of just sort of finding a rhythm of trying to deal with all the normal tasks and the abnormal tasks of trying to run this reality remotely. I am blessed with fantastic lay leaders as partners, strong volunteers, and incredible clergy and lay leader, and the clergy and staff partners as well. And lots of people are working together at the same moment. The challenge is everywhere, from those organizations that weren't run virtually in the first place, trying to figure out how we do this virtually, very quickly in terms of that, right? I'm sitting in my bedroom right now, figuring out how to do these things for my bedroom. My wife, who is a rabbi, also works for Hillel International. She has the study at home because she works from home to begin with. So while she can't travel for work right now, which is a big part of her work, she can do much of that work. She lets me use the study for the Bima on Shabbat because it's a nicer space. So
Oh, how funny.
and a better computer and camera.
Beth, any closing questions?
No, I just want to really thank you so much, whether it was when we were able to be at an event in your space or our work together on the Associated and Rabbi's Commission, or today, you just bring some wonderful insights, and we get it serious, and I also think you always bring some positive spirit to it all. So we really, really appreciate all you're doing and will continue to do. And thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything you'd like to share before we go to our announcements?
I mean, just let me thank Beth, you and the Associated and Jay Moore for partnership as well. And, we'll get to the other side of this. And this in the long run is not going to be about dues and membership and donations. It's going to be about people and tradition and the long-term values of Judaism and community working together to touch us individually and to touch our own community and beyond. There'll be another side to this. Just it'll take a while. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I'm just going to do some reminders for everyone who's still with us. Just a reminder that our next show is Thursday at 7 p.m. That will be another important discussion. Also, the 32nd Annual William and Irene Weinberg Family Baltimore Jewish Film Festival is going on now through June 10th. Go to jcc.org/film festival to learn more and to sign up. There's still plenty of films and speakers. And for those of you tired of cooking, Pearlstone is offering delicious farm-to-table meals for your family delivered to your home. So go to pearlstone.org for more information. And remember to continue to visit associated.org and jmoreliving.com for more information, stories, and resources. And I will end with stay well.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Rabbi Busch.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you.